Can faith truly be understood without symbols? When a reporter questions her beliefs, Caroline's response challenges everything you think you know about authenticity. The atmosphere in the room was charged, as camera crews adjusted their equipment, preparing for what was expected to be a typical interview. Caroline sat across from the seasoned reporter, Michael, her posture firm and composed, exuding a quiet strength. Michael, a journalist with a reputation for tough questioning, was ready for what he thought would be another routine exchange. He had researched Caroline extensively. Known for her steadfast faith, it shaped every aspect of her life. But today, he intended to test the limits of that faith, to uncover any cracks beneath the surface. As the hum of the studio lights filled the air, the cameras began to roll. Michael's voice cut through the tension, his tone dripping with an air of superiority. "So, Caroline," he began, his voice smooth but too confident, "you've often said that faith is the foundation of your life. But today I noticed something curious. No cross, almost as if faith was just for show." The words struck her sharply, but Caroline's eyes never wavered, her hands resting calmly on her lap. There was a brief silence before she responded. Michael expected a flicker of insecurity, a sign of weakness he could exploit. He had seen it before in others, but not Caroline. Her faith was an integral part of who she was, not something she displayed to gain approval. To her, faith wasn't a symbol or a badge worn for show. It was a deeply personal, internal conviction, one that didn't need external validation. It wasn't about wearing a cross or adorning her clothing with symbols. It was embedded in every action, thought, and most importantly, in the way she treated others. Yet Michael assumed that her faith wasn't genuine because it wasn't visibly represented. She felt the weight of his question, but it didn't shake her. Instead of reacting defensively, Caroline simply met Michael's gaze with unwavering calm. She had encountered similar provocations before, questions designed to unsettle and provoke, but this one felt different. It wasn't about her, but about something deeper. As she sat, carefully considering her response, the reporter shifted, expecting her to flinch or apologize for not conforming to others' expectations. But Caroline didn't need to apologize. Not now, not ever. Michael leaned in, sensing an opportunity to press her further. "It's curious," he said, smirking. "You preach about faith, but without the symbols, without the outward signs, it seems like maybe it's just a facade." The thinly veiled accusation didn't escape Caroline's notice. He was trying to provoke her, hoping to expose some vulnerability he could exploit. He was looking for a crack, something that would make the interview more interesting. But Caroline knew something Michael didn't. Her faith wasn't for him or for anyone else watching. It was for her. Tension hung in the air between them, but Caroline remained composed, not rushing to respond. She refused to let his words dictate her emotions. Instead, she let the silence stretch, subtly making him uncomfortable while she stayed grounded. She knew when to speak. Michael's patience began to wear thin. He watched Caroline, calm and collected, as though his question hadn't even fazed her. He had expected a defensive response, perhaps an apology, but instead, she remained unmoved. He could sense her calm, but he wasn't about to back down. To him, she was just a woman of faith, hiding behind a facade of quiet confidence. If she wasn't going to take the bait, he would press harder. "Well, Caroline," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "you talk about faith constantly, but the world's seen enough of people who wear their beliefs on their sleeves. There are plenty of people who claim to be faithful, yet their actions don't align. So, how do we know you're not just another example of that?" Caroline didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, and she adjusted her posture as though preparing for a conversation that required more than just a simple answer. Her voice, when it came, was firm. "I don't wear my faith to prove anything to anyone," she replied. "My actions speak louder than any cross, title, or symbol I could wear." Her words were simple yet weighty. But Michael wasn't done yet. He was still looking for a flaw, a moment where she might slip. Pressing further, he smirked. "Actions, huh? But what about the times when those actions seem to be more about you than your faith? When people can't tell the difference between doing something for attention and doing it out of genuine belief?" He paused, watching her closely. "Doesn't that bother you?" A subtle shift seemed to occur. Caroline's expression remained unchanged, but the quiet strength she radiated grew more apparent. She wasn't angry, but something in her eyes sparked, as if she was inviting him to see deeper into her perspective. "Faith isn't about what others think of me," she replied, her voice calm, but with a slight edge now. "It's about the work I do, the good I bring into the world. If you're looking for a show, you'll find none here. I don't answer to the crowd. And I don't need validation from anyone." Michael pressed on, unfazed. "So, you're saying it's just about you and the good you do, and everyone else can figure it out for themselves?" Caroline smiled slightly, a knowing look crossing her face. "No," she replied softly. "I'm saying it's about making a difference, even if no one ever sees it. It's about staying true to what I believe, regardless of whether people understand it." Michael's face darkened. He had expected an easier target, someone who would be shaken by the accusation. Instead, he found himself confronted by calm, unwavering belief. She wasn't reacting the way he hoped. This made her even more unsettling. "I see," he muttered, leaning back slightly. "But you know, Caroline, the world isn't just about personal beliefs. What if the world judges you? What if they don't see the good you do?" A long silence followed, and this time, Caroline leaned in, her voice dropping to a soft, deliberate whisper, almost like a blade cutting through the tension. "If the world judges me, Michael, then that's their choice. But I won't change who I am to fit their standards. That's the essence of faith, isn't it? Not changing who you are to fit in, but staying true to what you know is right." For a moment, the air in the room grew heavier, and Michael found himself at a loss. He had expected a confrontation, but instead, he encountered a moment of clarity that made him question his own beliefs. But Caroline wasn't finished yet. Her response had merely opened a door to something deeper, and Michael was about to find that out the hard way. As Michael sat back in his chair, the weight of Caroline's words lingered. For the first time in the interview, he faltered. The smugness he had carried throughout the conversation began to fade. He had hoped to provoke anger or fear, but instead, he had stirred something deeper, a quiet strength that was impossible to challenge. Caroline wasn't done yet. She felt the moment stretch, an unspoken understanding growing between them. Caroline had learned long ago that some battles were won not through words, but by remaining still, patient, and true to oneself. For a brief moment, her eyes drifted to a picture on the wall, a landscape she recognized. It reminded her of a quiet town, a retreat she had once visited. It was a place where people lived simply, not chasing validation from others. It was authenticity in its purest form. Reflecting on why she was sitting there, answering questions designed to expose her contradictions, Caroline realized she didn't need to justify herself. Her faith was beyond that. It wasn't a performance. It couldn't be shaken by doubts or questions. It was the foundation of everything she did, regardless of whether the world understood it or not. She breathed deeply, the tension easing. Her response was not just a reaction, it was an understanding of her own spiritual journey. Faith wasn't a symbol. It was about how she lived each day, how she treated others, and how she responded to the world around her. As silence filled the room, Michael, unsure of how to proceed, fell silent. Caroline had realized something profound. This wasn't about defending faith, it was about authenticity, standing firm in who you are, regardless of the world's expectations. The most powerful responses aren't always the loudest. They are the quiet ones that are impossible to ignore. The interview wasn't just a battle of words anymore. Caroline wasn't interested in proving herself. The reporter's challenges no longer mattered. She knew she was true to herself, no matter how others tried to break her resolve. Finally, sensing a last opportunity, Michael asked one last question, hoping to break her resolve. But the silence between them grew longer, and his strategy seemed to unravel. Caroline's quiet confidence had thrown him off course. He had expected her to crack, but she only deepened the silence around them, standing firm in her beliefs. "So, you really think the world should just accept that faith doesn't need to be seen?" Michael pressed. "That people don't need to understand why you believe what you do?" He paused, trying to find her weakness. "Isn't that a little hypocritical?" Caroline allowed a moment of silence before responding. Caroline wasn't trying to prove herself to anyone. She simply stated the truth. The clarity in her voice made it hard for Michael to respond. Her words made him question his own assumptions about faith, about how people chose to live their beliefs. She wasn't here to convince anyone. She was here to live the truth of what she believed, regardless of whether others understood it. The silence in the room was deafening. For a long moment, Michael didn't speak. Caroline sat quietly, her presence unwavering, as if her faith was a quiet force filling the room. The interview had shifted, and Michael could feel it. The words he had prepared no longer mattered. Caroline had done more than defend herself. She had shown Michael a mirror, reflecting his biases back at him. The camera zoomed in on her calm expression as Michael scrambled to regain control of the interview. The energy in the room had shifted. Caroline sat there, unshaken by Michael's words, her message resonating deeply in the silence that followed. She hadn't just won the interview. She had won a deeper understanding of herself and her faith. The world may try to define her, but she remained true to who she was. Caroline's words had left a lasting impact. Michael sat back, blinking, his usual sharpness gone. He tried to regain his composure, but it was clear. The interview was over. Caroline had made her point, not by attacking, but by living her truth. The crew began to pack up, and the room, once filled with tension, now felt quiet. Caroline smiled softly, her message clear. She had shared a piece of herself with the world, and it had been heard. As she left the studio, Caroline's message echoed. Faith isn't about outward symbols. It's about how we live our truth in the quiet moments. It's about conviction and authenticity, standing firm in who we are, regardless of the world's judgments.